The telegram arrived on the hottest day of July in 1883, and Zelda Fairmont knew, before opening it, that her life in Boston was about to change forever. She stood in the parlor of her childhood home, the expensive education her father had insisted upon now feeling like an anchor around her neck, as she read the words that confirmed her worst suspicions. Thomas Wellington had broken their engagement, citing her unnatural intellectual pursuits as incompatible with the role of a proper wife. Zelda crumpled the telegram in her fist, her hazel eyes burning not with tears but with fury. 23 years old, fluent in 3 languages, with a mind for mathematics that had astounded her private tutors, and this was what had earned her rejection. The third one this year. Boston society had made its position clear. A woman could be beautiful or she could be brilliant, but never both without consequence. Her father, Edmund Fairmont, found her an hour later still standing in the same spot, staring out the window at the manicured gardens that suddenly felt like prison walls. "Zelda, my dear," he said, his voice heavy with concern. "I've received a letter from your Uncle Victor in California. He writes that the mining town of Keeler, where he has established a profitable operation, is in desperate need of a schoolteacher. The previous one left rather abruptly to marry a rancher." "California," Zelda turned, surprised. Her father had always been protective, perhaps too much so after her mother's death 5 years prior. "I know it is not what we envisioned for you," Edmund continued, adjusting his spectacles, "but perhaps a change of scenery, a place where your mind might be appreciated rather than feared." He trailed off, and Zelda saw the sadness in his eyes. He knew what Boston thought of his daughter. Within 3 weeks, Zelda found herself on a train westward, her trunks full of books alongside the more practical items her father had insisted she bring. The journey was long and uncomfortable, but with each mile she felt something loosening in her chest, hope, perhaps, or simply the relief of escape. Keeler, California, sat in the Owens Valley, a dusty settlement that had sprung up around silver mining operations. When Zelda stepped off the stagecoach in late August, the heat hit her like a physical force. The main street was unpaved, lined with rough wooden buildings that looked thrown together in haste. Miners, cowboys, and the occasional family moved about their business, and Zelda was immediately aware of how out of place she looked in her traveling dress and proper hat. Uncle Victor met her with a broad smile, his weathered face so different from the refined features of her father despite their brotherhood. "Zelda, my dear girl, welcome to Keeler. I hope the journey was not too taxing." "It was educational," Zelda replied, accepting his embrace. "I have never seen so much of this country." "Well, you will find things quite different here than in Boston," Victor said, loading her trunks onto a wagon. "The school is modest, but the children are eager to learn. Well, most of them. Some of the families see education as less important than getting their youngsters working as soon as possible." As they drove through town, Victor pointed out the general store, the saloon, the assay office, and finally, the small whitewashed building that would be her schoolhouse. Beside it stood a tiny cottage. "That will be your residence," Victor explained. "It is not grand, but it is clean and secure. I have had it provisioned with the basics, and you may purchase anything else you need from the store on my account until you receive your first month's salary." The cottage was indeed small, one main room serving as kitchen and sitting area, a bedroom barely large enough for a bed and wardrobe, and a washroom that was luxurious by frontier standards. But it was hers, Zelda realized. For the first time in her life, she had a space that belonged to her alone, where she could think and read and be exactly who she was without judgment. She spent the next week preparing the schoolhouse, cleaning the desks, organizing the few books available, and creating lesson plans that would serve children of varying ages and abilities. The challenge excited her. This was real work, meaningful work, not the decorative accomplishments expected of Boston ladies. On the Sunday before school was to begin, Zelda attended church services, knowing it was important to be seen as respectable. The small church was packed, and she felt every eye upon her as she entered. She held her head high, nodding politely to those who met her gaze, and took a seat near the back. After the service, she was immediately surrounded by curious townspeople. The women sized her up with expressions ranging from welcoming to suspicious, while the men kept a respectful distance, hats in hands. Miss Fairmont, a stern-looking woman in her 50s, approached. "I am Mrs. Patterson. My two youngest will be in your school. I hope you will maintain proper discipline. The last teacher was far too lenient." "I believe in both discipline and encouragement, Mrs. Patterson," Zelda replied evenly. "Children learn best when they feel both challenged and supported." Mrs. Patterson sniffed, clearly reserving judgment, and moved aside to let others introduce themselves. Zelda met so many people that their names blurred together, but she made mental notes about which children belonged to which families, already planning how to approach her new students. She was accepting an invitation to tea from the minister's wife when she noticed him, a tall man standing apart from the crowd, leaning against a hitching post outside the church. He wore the typical attire of a working cowboy: worn denim trousers, a chambray shirt, a leather vest, and a hat pulled low enough to shadow his eyes. But there was something about the way he stood, a quietness that suggested he was watching everything while appearing to watch nothing at all. Their eyes met for just a moment, and Zelda felt an unexpected jolt, like recognition of something she had not known she was looking for. Then someone else demanded her attention, and when she looked again, he was gone. The first day of school arrived with a brilliant sunrise that painted the mountains to the west in shades of gold and rose. Zelda arrived early, writing her name on the board in careful script: Miss Zelda Fairmont. She had decided against including any mention of her education, knowing it might intimidate or alienate some families. The children arrived in clusters, some excited, some reluctant, some clearly terrified. She had 14 students ranging from 6 to 15 years old. The older ones, she suspected, would be the biggest challenge. They would question why they needed book learning when they could be earning wages. "Good morning," Zelda said warmly when they were all seated. "Welcome to a new school year. I am Miss Fairmont, and I am very pleased to be your teacher. This year, we are going to learn many things together. Some of you may think you know everything already, and some of you may think you can never learn enough. I believe you are all capable of more than you imagine." A boy of about 13 in the back row rolled his eyes. "You just another fancy lady who will quit when she catches herself a husband," he drawled. Several children gasped, but Zelda smiled. "What is your name?" "Jimmy Patterson, madam." "Well, Jimmy Patterson, I am here to teach, not to hunt for a husband. In fact, I came to California specifically because I was tired of men who thought a woman should not use her mind. So, if you are trying to chase me off, you will need a better strategy than rudeness." Her tone was light but firm, and she saw surprise flicker across Jimmy's face, followed by a grudging respect. The day proceeded better than she had hoped. The younger children were enthusiastic, and even the skeptical older ones seemed engaged when she made the lessons practical, using mining calculations for mathematics, discussing the geology of the valley for science, and analyzing newspaper articles for reading comprehension. When the last student left, Zelda sat at her desk, exhausted but satisfied. She was gathering her things when a shadow fell across the doorway. It was the man from the church, and now she could see him clearly. He was perhaps 26 or 27, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of whiskey in sunlight. His face was tanned from outdoor work, with strong features that were more interesting than conventionally handsome. There was a wariness in his expression, but also an intelligence that caught her attention. "Help you?" Zelda asked, standing. "Begging your pardon, Miss Fairmont," he said, his voice a deep drawl that spoke of Texas origins. "Name is Grant Lawson. I work the ranch outside town belonging to the widow Mrs. Crawford. She asked me to speak with you about her grandson, Daniel. He is 10 years old and he is different." "Different how?" Zelda moved closer, genuinely interested. Grant seemed surprised by her direct question. "He does not talk, madam. Has not spoken a word since his parents died 2 years back. Mrs. Crawford wanted you to know before he started school tomorrow, so you would not think him defiant or simple. He is neither. He is actually quite bright, taught himself to read from his mother's books. But some folks do not have patience for a child who does not speak." Zelda felt her heart constrict. "Thank you for telling me, Mr. Lawson. I will make sure Daniel feels welcome and supported. There are many ways to communicate beyond speech." Grant's expression shifted, the wariness giving way to something warmer. "That is kind of you to say, madam. Most people just think he needs a firm hand or punishment to shock him out of it." "Most people are fools," Zelda said flatly, then caught herself. "I apologize. That was uncharitable." To her surprise, Grant smiled a genuine smile that transformed his entire face. "No, madam. That was honest. And you are right. Mrs. Crawford will be relieved to hear you are willing to take Daniel on. I am not taking him on like he is a burden, Mr. Lawson. He is a student who deserves the same education and respect as any other child." Grant studied her for a long moment, and Zelda felt that strange jolt again, a sense of being truly seen in a way she had rarely experienced. "You are not what I expected when I heard a Boston lady was coming to teach school." "And what did you expect?" "Someone more concerned with appearing proper than with actually teaching," he admitted. "Someone who would look down on ranch hands and miners, who would last maybe 3 months before running back east." "Then we both have the opportunity to challenge our assumptions, Mr. Lawson. I assumed all cowboys were unlettered men concerned only with their next drink and card game." She raised an eyebrow, letting him know she was partly teasing. "Some are," he acknowledged, "but some of us figure there is more to life than that." He hesitated, then added, "I notice you have quite a few books in your school. I wonder if you might be willing to lend some out." "I go through the few I own pretty regularly, and the selection at the general store is not exactly stimulating." This surprised Zelda more than anything else that day. "You read for pleasure?" "Yes, madam. Taught myself when I was younger. My mother died when I was 8, and my father was not much for conversation. Books were better company than silence." There was no self-pity in his voice, just fact. "Then you are welcome to borrow whatever you like, Mr. Lawson. I would be happy to discuss what you read if you are interested. I find that books are even better when you can talk about them with someone." Something shifted in Grant's expression, a kind of hunger that Zelda recognized because she felt it too, the loneliness of a mind that needed more than small talk and surface conversations. "I would like that very much, Miss Fairmont. Thank you." He left shortly after, and Zelda walked back to her cottage with her thoughts in turmoil. She had not come to California looking for romance. After 3 rejections, she had convinced herself that she was better off alone, married to her work rather than to a man who would resent her intelligence. But something about Grant Lawson unsettled that resolution, suggested possibilities she had not considered. Daniel Crawford appeared the next morning, a slight boy with serious dark eyes and his grandmother's gentle expression. Zelda greeted him warmly and showed him to a desk near the front, providing him with a slate and chalk. "Daniel, if you need anything or want to answer a question, you can write it down," she said quietly. "And if you prefer just to listen and learn, that is fine too. There is no pressure here, only opportunity." Daniel regarded her with those solemn eyes, then gave a small nod. Throughout the day, Zelda noticed him watching everything with intense focus. When she posed a mathematics problem to the class, his chalk moved across the slate, solving it correctly long before the other students. She smiled at him, acknowledging his work without making a fuss that might embarrass him. At the end of the day, Daniel approached her desk and handed her his slate. On it was written in careful letters, "Thank you." "You are very welcome, Daniel," Zelda replied. "I am glad you are here." True to his word, Grant Lawson returned on Wednesday evening after school had ended. He was freshly washed, his hair damp and curling, and he carried his hat in his hands like he was approaching something sacred. "I hope I am not intruding, Miss Fairmont," he said from the doorway. "Not at all, Mr. Lawson. Come in." Zelda gestured to the bookshelf she had installed along one wall. "I have not had time to organize these properly, but you are welcome to browse." Grant moved to the shelves with the reverence of a man entering a library. His fingers traced the spines gently. Shakespeare, Austen, Dickens, Thoreau, Darwin, collections of poetry, books on mathematics and natural philosophy, histories and mythologies. "You have read all of these?" he asked, wonder in his voice. "Most of them, some multiple times." "A few I brought with the intention of reading them here. My father believes a good library is essential to a good life." "Your father sounds like a wise man." Grant pulled out a volume of Walt Whitman's poetry. "May I borrow this one?" "Of course. Have you read Whitman before?" "Only a few poems that appeared in a magazine someone left at the ranch house. His words feel like the West itself, big and wild and honest." They talked for an hour about poetry, about the difference between the restrained formality of Longfellow and the raw energy of Whitman, about how words could capture feelings that seemed too large for ordinary conversation. Grant spoke with an eloquence that surprised Zelda, even though she knew it should not. Intelligence had nothing to do with formal education or social class, a fact that Boston society refused to acknowledge. "I should let you get to your supper," Grant said finally, reluctantly. "But may I come back when I have finished this? To return it and perhaps borrow another?" "You may come back any time, Mr. Lawson. And if you would like to discuss what you have read, I would enjoy that." As September gave way to October, a pattern developed. Grant would visit twice a week, always after school hours, always respectful of propriety by keeping the schoolhouse door open and never staying too long. They would discuss books, but the conversations inevitably expanded to include everything else: philosophy and politics, observations about human nature, questions about the universe and their place in it. Zelda found herself looking forward to these visits with an anticipation that went beyond intellectual stimulation. She noticed details about Grant that had nothing to do with his mind. The way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the careful gentleness of his hands when he turned pages, the warmth in his voice when he spoke about the horses he tended at the Crawford Ranch. For his part, Grant seemed equally drawn to these encounters. He began bringing small gifts: wildflowers from the range, a perfectly smooth stone from the creek, a feather from a hawk. Nothing expensive or inappropriate, just tokens that said he had been thinking of her. The town noticed, of course. Keeler was too small for secrets. Mrs. Patterson made pointed comments about propriety. The minister's wife smiled knowingly. Uncle Victor expressed concern that Zelda was keeping company with a mere ranch hand. though his objection was gentle and easily deflected. "Grant Lawson is one of the finest men I have met, regardless of his occupation," Zelda told her uncle firmly. "He has a brilliant mind and a kind heart, and those are the qualities that matter to me. Your father sent you here to teach, not to attach yourself to a cowboy," Victor said, though his tone suggested he was not entirely serious about the objection. "My father sent me here to be appreciated for who I am, not rejected for being too educated," Zelda countered. "Grant appreciates my mind as much as anything else about me. That is more than any Boston gentleman ever offered." The truth was, Zelda was falling in love, though she had not admitted it even to herself. She had built such strong walls around her heart after the rejections, convinced that romance was incompatible with intellect. But Grant was dismantling those walls brick by brick, simply by being himself, by listening to her ideas without condescension, by challenging her thoughts without dismissing them, by looking at her like she was both fascinating and beautiful in equal measure. One evening in late October, after a particularly lively discussion about Darwin's theories, Grant set down the book he was holding and looked at Zelda with unusual intensity. "May I be honest with you about something, Miss Fairmont? I wish you would be. And please, when we are alone like this, call me Zelda. We have known each other for 2 months now." "Zelda," he said, testing her name like it was precious, "I need you to know that I do not come here just for the books. I come because spending time with you has become the best part of my week. You make me think about things I had given up hoping for, a life that includes more than just work and survival, conversations that feed my mind the way food feeds my body, the possibility that someone might want to share that kind of life with me." Zelda's heart hammered against her ribs. "And what kind of life is that? One where two people can be truly themselves with each other, where intelligence is celebrated, not hidden, where companionship means talking about ideas and dreams, not just household matters and social obligations." He paused, vulnerability clear in his expression. "I know I am just a ranch hand. I do not have wealth or position, but I have a mind that needs engagement and a heart that needs purpose, and since meeting you, I have started to think that maybe those things could be enough for the right person." "They are enough," Zelda said quietly. "More than enough. Do you know how many wealthy, educated men in Boston courted me, 3 proposed marriage, and do you know what every single one of them wanted? A wife who would smile prettily and never express an opinion that contradicted theirs, who would hide her education like it was something shameful, who would pretend to be less intelligent than she was to protect male pride." She stood and moved closer to Grant, her eyes bright with emotion. "You are the first man who has ever asked me what I think and actually wanted to hear the answer. The first man who has brought me books instead of flowers, though I appreciate the wildflowers too. The first man who has looked at my mind as something attractive rather than threatening." "How could any man find your mind threatening?" Grant stood as well, and they were close now, close enough that Zelda could see the flecks of green in his amber eyes. "You are extraordinary, Zelda. Your intelligence, your passion for learning, the way you care about your students, all of it makes you more beautiful, not less. Then you are extraordinary as well, Grant, because that perspective is rarer than you might think." She took a breath, feeling like she was standing at the edge of something vast and important. "I came to California thinking I was giving up on the possibility of love, choosing my mind over my heart because I could not have both. But perhaps I was wrong. Perhaps I just needed to find someone who understood that my mind and my heart are not separate things." Grant reached out slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, and took her hand. His palm was calloused from years of ranch work, warm and steady. "I would very much like to court you properly," Zelda Fairmont. With your permission. You have it, Zelda said, and then she was smiling, genuinely smiling in a way she had not since before the rejections. Though I should warn you, I am told I can be difficult, too opinionated, too stubborn, too intense about my interests. Good, Grant said simply. I would not want you any other way. Their courtship became the talk of Keeler. To some, it was a scandal. A learned Boston lady and a Texas cowboy seemed mismatched in every way. But to others, particularly those who knew both parties well, it made perfect sense. Mrs. Crawford, Grant's employer, was especially pleased. She told anyone who would listen that Grant had been wasting away with no one to talk to about the books he loved, and Miss Fairmont had brought him back to life. Grant began calling on Zelda openly, taking her for walks through the valley on Sunday afternoons, sitting with her at church, joining her at community gatherings. They were rarely without something to discuss. Grant had opinions about everything, formed from wide reading and careful observation, and he delighted in Zelda's ability to challenge and refine his thinking. "You make me smarter," he told her one Sunday as they walked along the creek. "Every conversation we have, I see things in a new way." "You do the same for me," Zelda replied. "I was surrounded by formally educated people in Boston, but so many of them just repeated what they had been taught without really thinking about it. You question everything, examine ideas from all angles. That is true intelligence." November brought the first snow to the mountains, and with it, a new challenge. Jimmy Patterson, the boy who had questioned Zelda on the first day of school, was caught stealing food from the general store. The shopkeeper wanted him arrested, but Zelda intervened. "Let me speak with him first," she asked, "and with his mother." She discovered that the Patterson family had fallen on hard times. The father had been injured in the mine and could not work, and there were 6 children to feed. Jimmy had been trying to help without worrying his mother. Zelda brought the situation to Grant. "I want to help them, but I do not want to offer charity that would embarrass the family. What would you suggest?" Grant thought for a moment. "There is always work on a ranch, even in winter. Jimmy is big enough to handle basic tasks, mending fences, mucking stables, helping with feed. If Mrs. Crawford agrees, we could hire him for a few hours after school and on Saturdays. He would earn the money honestly, which would preserve his dignity." It was exactly the right solution. Mrs. Crawford agreed immediately, and Jimmy proved to be a hard worker. More than that, he began to excel at school, as if the responsibility and the income had given him new motivation. He started staying after class to ask Zelda questions about mathematics and science, revealing a keen, analytical mind. "I think I might want to be an engineer someday," he told Zelda one afternoon. "Build bridges or railways. Is that foolish for someone like me?" "It is not foolish at all, Jimmy. It is ambitious, which is different. You have the mind for it. You would need more education than I can provide here, but there are technical schools that might offer scholarships for promising students. We can write letters of inquiry if you are serious about this." The hope in Jimmy's eyes reminded Zelda why she had become a teacher. This was what education should be: opening doors, expanding possibilities, letting young people imagine bigger futures than their current circumstances suggested. She shared the conversation with Grant that evening, and he listened with the focused attention he always gave her words. "You are changing lives here," he said. "Not just teaching facts and figures, but changing how these children see themselves and their potential. I am trying. Some days I wonder if I am making any real difference." "You are," Grant said firmly. "Look at Daniel." He started writing whole sentences on his slate last week, not just answers to questions but his own thoughts and observations. "Look at Jimmy, imagining a future beyond just survival." Look at every child in that schoolhouse who has learned that curiosity is valuable and intelligence is worth developing. You are absolutely making a difference." Zelda felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you for seeing that, for seeing me as I actually am." "I could not do otherwise," Grant said. "You are the most remarkable person I have ever known, Zelda." They were sitting on the porch of her cottage, the November evening cold enough that Zelda had wrapped herself in a shawl. Grant took off his jacket and draped it around her shoulders, letting his hands rest there for a moment longer than necessary. "I am falling in love with you," he said quietly. "I probably should not say it so directly, but I have never been good at pretense. From the first time we talked about books, I felt like I had found something I did not even know I was looking for. And every conversation since has made me more certain that you are who I want to spend my life with." Zelda turned to face him fully, her heart racing. "I am falling in love with you too. I fought against it at first because I was afraid of being rejected again, afraid of losing myself in someone else's expectations. But you do not have expectations like that. You just want me to be fully myself." "Always," Grant said. "I want all of you, Zelda. Your brilliant mind and your passionate heart and your stubborn determination and every other part of you. I want to wake up every morning knowing I get to spend the day in a world where you exist. I want to talk with you about everything and nothing, to build a life where we both keep growing and learning. And yes, someday I want to marry you, though I know we have not been courting long enough for me to properly propose." "How long is long enough?" Zelda asked, breathless. "I do not know." "What is the rule for such things?" "I do not care about rules, Grant. I spent my whole life in Boston following rules about what a proper young lady should do and think and be, and all it got me was rejection and loneliness. I care about what is true and what is right, and the truth is that I love you. The truth is that in 3 months, you have understood me better than people who have known me my entire life. Is that not enough?" Grant cupped her face gently in his hands. "It is everything," he said, and then he kissed her. It was Zelda's first real kiss, and it was nothing like the chaste, perfunctory gestures she had received from her former suitors. This was tender and passionate and full of promise, a conversation conducted without words but with perfect understanding. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. "I should probably ask your father's permission before we make any plans," Grant said, practical even in the midst of romance. "I am 23 years old, living on my own, earning my own income," Zelda replied. "I do not need my father's permission, but I would like his blessing, and I think you would too. We could write to him together." They composed the letter that evening, sitting side by side at Zelda's small table. It was honest and direct, explaining their feelings and their hopes, acknowledging the unconventional nature of their match but arguing for its rightness. They posted it the next day and settled in to wait for a response that would take weeks to arrive. In the meantime, life continued. December brought Christmas preparations, and Zelda organized a school program where the children would recite poetry and display their academic work for their families. Daniel, who still had not spoken aloud, wrote a beautiful essay about the natural history of the Owens Valley that made his grandmother weep with pride. Jimmy Patterson delivered a presentation on engineering principles that showed a sophisticated understanding of physics and mathematics. Even the youngest children participated, proudly demonstrating their reading skills and arithmetic. The whole town attended, packing into the schoolhouse on a cold December evening. Zelda stood before them feeling both nervous and proud. These students had worked so hard, and they deserved to be celebrated. After the program, as families mingled and enjoyed the refreshments Zelda had provided, Mrs. Patterson approached her with an expression that was almost friendly. "Miss Fairmont, I must admit I had my doubts about you when you first arrived, but you have done more for these children in a few months than any teacher we have had. My Jimmy talks about engineering now, about going to technical school. I never thought such things were possible for a boy like him. They are possible, Mrs. Patterson. He has the intelligence and the determination. He just needs opportunity and encouragement. Well, you have given him both, and I hear you are to marry Grant Lawson come spring. News traveled fast in Keeler. Zelda smiled. We have not set a date yet, but yes, we hope to marry when my father's response arrives. He is a good man, Grant. Quiet and steady, and smart, though not everyone notices because he does not show it off. You two are well matched, I think. Both too smart for your own good, as my mother would have said. But Mrs. Patterson was smiling when she said it, her tone affectionate rather than critical. Christmas came and went, and Zelda spent it with Uncle Victor, Grant, and the Crawfords. It was a quiet celebration, but warm and full of genuine affection. Mrs. Crawford had knitted Zelda a beautiful shawl, and Daniel gave her a carefully pressed collection of wildflowers with their common and scientific names written in his precise hand. Grant's gift to Zelda was a first edition of a collection of essays by Ralph Waldo Emerson, something he must have saved months to afford. Inside the cover he had written, "For Zelda, who proves that self-reliance and devotion can coexist, with all my love, Grant." Zelda's gift to Grant was more practical but no less thoughtful, a leather journal with fine paper where he could write his own thoughts and observations. "You have so many ideas," she told him. "They deserve to be recorded." "Only if you will read them," Grant said, "always." In January, Edmund Fairmont's response arrived. Zelda opened it with trembling hands while Grant stood beside her, equally nervous. The letter was long and thoughtful, and as Zelda read it aloud, she could hear her father's voice in every word. "My dear Zelda," it began. "Your letter brought me both surprise and surprise, because I had not known you were forming an attachment, and joy because everything you write about Mr. Lawson suggests he is exactly the kind of man I had hoped you would find. Intelligence wedded to character is the rarest combination, and it seems you have discovered both in this young cowboy. I confess I had my doubts about sending you west. I worried I was banishing you from civilized society, condemning you to loneliness in pursuit of work that would value you. But your letters over these months have shown me that I was wrong to think of Boston as the center of civilization. True civilization exists wherever people treat each other with respect and kindness, wherever minds can meet in honest discourse, wherever human potential is nurtured rather than constrained. You have my blessing and my wholehearted support for this marriage. I have only one request, that you allow me to attend the wedding and meet this Grant Lawson who has won my daughter's heart with books and conversation rather than flattery and false promises. I will arrive in Keeler in April, if that suits your plans. Until then, know that I am proud of you, my dear girl, for following your mind and your heart to their proper destination." Zelda finished reading with tears streaming down her face. Grant gathered her into his arms, and they stood there for a long moment, holding each other. "He is coming," Zelda said unnecessarily. "He approves." "We should probably plan a wedding then," Grant replied, and Zelda could hear the smile in his voice. They decided on a date in late April, after Edmund's arrival but before the intense heat of summer. The wedding would be simple, held in the small church with a reception in the schoolhouse afterward. Zelda had no interest in elaborate affairs, and Grant's tastes were equally modest. Mrs. Crawford insisted on sewing Zelda's wedding dress, a beautiful creation of ivory silk that managed to be both elegant and practical. "You will want to be able to wear this again, not have it sit in a trunk gathering dust," she said practically. so we will make it lovely but useful. Daniel helped Grant build furniture for the small house. They would share a better dwelling than either the cottage or Grant's sparse room at the ranch. It was located on a piece of land Grant had been slowly purchasing from his wages, with the dream of eventually starting his own horse breeding operation. Mrs. Crawford has agreed to sell me 3 mares from her stock at a fair price, Grant told Zelda as they walked the perimeter of their future property. It will take years to build up a proper herd, but I have time and determination. We have time, Zelda corrected. This is our future, our dream. I may not know much about horses yet, but I can learn, and I can help with the business side, keeping records, managing finances. Grant stopped walking and pulled Zelda close. Do you know how extraordinary you are? Most women would want nothing to do with the hard work of starting a ranch. I am not most women. You should have figured that out by now. Zelda kissed him soundly. Besides, I think it is exciting, building something from nothing, creating a life exactly as we want it. February and March passed in a flurry of preparation. Zelda continued teaching, determined not to let wedding plans distract from her students' education. Grant worked longer hours to save additional money for their household. They spent their evenings together planning their future, discussing everything from house design to book purchases to how many children they hoped to have. At least 3, Zelda said firmly. I was lonely as an only child, especially after my mother died. I want our children to have siblings. 3 sounds perfect, Grant agreed, though I hope they all inherit your mind. And your kindness, Zelda added. Intelligence without compassion is useless. Edmund Fairmont arrived in mid-April, stepping off the stagecoach looking travel-worn but alert. Zelda ran to embrace him, surprised by how much she had missed her father despite the freedom California had given her. Let me look at you, Edmund said, holding her at arm's length. You seem taller somehow, though I know that is impossible. I am standing straighter, Zelda said. No longer trying to make myself smaller to fit other people's expectations. That is exactly what I hoped for. Edmund turned to Grant, who had been standing respectfully back, and extended his hand. Mr. Lawson, I presume? Yes, sir. It is an honor to meet you. Grant's handshake was firm, his gaze direct. Edmund studied the younger man carefully. My daughter tells me you are a reader, Mr. Lawson. Yes, sir. Books have been my education since I did not have the opportunity for formal schooling. And what are you reading currently? A collection of Emerson's essays, sir. The one I gave Zelda for Christmas. She finished it quickly and returned it to me, and we have been discussing his ideas about individualism and society. Ah, Emerson. And what is your opinion of his philosophy? Grant did not hesitate. I think he is right that people should trust their own judgment rather than simply accepting conventional wisdom. But I also think he undervalues the importance of community and mutual obligation. We cannot all be entirely self-reliant. We need each other. Edmund's expression shifted to something like delight. That is almost exactly the critique I myself have made. Well, Mr. Lawson, I see my daughter has chosen wisely. Any man who can think critically about what he reads and articulate his thoughts clearly is worth knowing. The 3 of them spent the next week together, and Zelda watched with satisfaction as her father and her fiancé developed genuine friendship. They argued cheerfully about philosophy and politics, compared observations about natural science, and discussed the economic development of the West with the enthusiasm of people who genuinely enjoyed thinking. I had hoped you would find someone who appreciated your mind, Edmund told Zelda one evening while Grant was occupied elsewhere. But I confess I did not imagine he would be a self-educated cowboy in a California mining town. Life is full of surprises. The best kind of surprises, Zelda replied. Grant is everything I did not know I wanted, Father. He challenges me intellectually, respects me personally, and loves me completely. That is more than most women ever get. It is more than most people ever get, regardless of gender, Edmund corrected. You are both very fortunate. The wedding day arrived with perfect spring weather, warm but not hot, the mountains green from winter snow melt. Zelda dressed in her new gown, her hair arranged simply with wildflowers woven through it. She carried no bouquet, preferring to keep her hands free. The church was packed with townspeople who had come to respect the unconventional schoolteacher and her cowboy. Uncle Victor walked Zelda down the aisle, beaming with pride, while Edmund watched from the front row with suspiciously bright eyes. Grant stood waiting, wearing new clothes that made him look almost uncomfortable until he saw Zelda. Then his face transformed into pure joy, and suddenly he looked completely natural, completely himself. The ceremony was brief and traditional, but when it came time to speak their vows, both Zelda and Grant had requested permission to add their own words. Zelda, Grant said, holding both her hands and looking directly into her eyes. I promise to love your mind as much as your heart, to challenge your thinking while respecting your conclusions, to build a life where we both can grow and learn and become more fully ourselves. I promise to be your partner in all things, your equal in devotion if not always in brilliance. I promise to never ask you to be less than you are, and to always celebrate what makes you extraordinary. Zelda's voice was steady despite the emotion flooding through her. Grant, I promise to love you for exactly who you are, a man of intelligence and integrity who proves that wisdom has nothing to do with formal education or social position. I promise to be your partner in building our future, to share the work and the joy equally. I promise to never take for granted that you see my mind as beautiful rather than threatening, and to honor the heart that has been brave enough to love me without conditions. There was not a dry eye in the church when they finished. Even Jimmy Patterson was wiping at his face, trying to be subtle about it. The minister completed the ceremony, and Grant kissed his new wife with a tenderness that made the moment feel sacred. As they walked back down the aisle together, Zelda felt a sense of completeness she had never experienced before. This was what she had been looking for without knowing it, not just acceptance but celebration, not just tolerance but active appreciation. The reception in the schoolhouse was lively and warm. Someone had brought a fiddle, and there was dancing despite the limited space. Zelda danced with her father, with Uncle Victor, with several of her students who insisted despite their shyness. But mostly she danced with Grant, circling the room in his arms and feeling like the luckiest woman alive. "Happy, Mrs. Lawson," Grant murmured as they swayed to a slower tune. "Deliriously," Zelda replied, "though I am keeping Fairmont as my professional name at school. I earned that reputation, and I do not want to confuse the children or the parents." "I would expect nothing less," Grant said. "You are still yourself, just with a husband now, the best possible husband." They spent their wedding night in their new house, surrounded by wedding gifts and the furniture they had built together. It was not grand, but it was theirs, a place where they could be completely themselves without performance or pretense. As Zelda lay in Grant's arms that night, she thought about the telegram that had arrived in Boston less than a year ago, the rejection that had felt like the end of possibility. If someone had told her then that she would end up married to a cowboy in California, teaching in a one-room schoolhouse and planning a horse ranch, she would have thought they were insane. But life had its own logic, she was learning. The path that seemed like exile had actually been liberation. The man who seemed impossible by Boston standards was actually perfect by the only standards that mattered: compatibility of mind and heart. "What are you thinking?" Grant asked, sensing she was still awake. "That I would not change a single thing about my life right now. That everything that seemed like failure or disappointment was actually leading me here to you, to this." "I was thinking something similar," Grant admitted. "All those years reading alone, working hard but never quite seeing a future beyond just survival, it was all preparing me to recognize something extraordinary when I found it. To recognize you." They talked long into the night, as they would for the rest of their lives, about dreams and ideas, fears and hopes, the small observations and the grand theories that made life rich and interesting. This was what marriage should be, Zelda thought. Not the silencing of one voice by another, but a harmony of two voices in conversation. Edmund stayed in Keeler for another 2 weeks, dividing his time between his brother's house and visiting with Zelda and Grant. He attended Zelda's school, observing her teaching methods with professional interest. "You are wasted here," he said afterward, though his tone was admiring rather than critical. "With your mind and your methods, you could revolutionize educational theory." "Maybe someday I will write about my experiences," Zelda said. "But right now, I am exactly where I want to be. These children need me and I need them. The work feels important." "That is all that matters then," Edmund agreed. "Important work and a good marriage, you have the essential ingredients for a happy life." When Edmund finally departed, promising to return for a longer visit the following year, Zelda felt a bittersweet mixture of sadness and satisfaction. She missed him already, but she was also eager to begin her new life without the distraction of visitors and celebration. The school year ended in May with another successful program. Several families approached Zelda about continuing lessons through the summer for students who wanted extra learning, particularly Jimmy Patterson and a few others with academic ambitions. "I could offer classes twice a week," Zelda proposed to Grant. "It would bring in some additional income, and I would enjoy keeping my mind engaged, though I do not want to neglect the ranch work." "We could schedule classes in the morning while it is cooler," Grant suggested. "That way you have afternoons free for other work." "And honestly, Zelda, your teaching is too valuable to interrupt completely. These children are learning things that will change their lives." So Zelda taught through the summer, watching her advanced students flourish with the extra attention. Jimmy Patterson in particular thrived, his mathematical abilities growing in leaps and bounds. By August, he was working through problems that would challenge many college students. "Have you heard anything from the technical schools?" Jimmy asked eagerly during one session. "Not yet, but these things take time. We sent letters to 3 different institutions explaining your situation and your abilities. Someone will respond, I am certain of it." Meanwhile, Grant was making progress on the ranch. With Zelda's help managing the finances, they were able to purchase 2 additional mares sooner than expected. Grant had a gift for horse training, a patience and intuition that the animals responded to immediately. "You should be proud," Mrs. Crawford told Zelda when she visited one Sunday. "Grant has worked for me for 6 years, and I have never seen him this happy or this confident. Marriage suits him. You suit him." "He suits me too," Zelda said warmly. "I spent so long thinking I had to choose between intellectual fulfillment and emotional connection. Grant proves that is a false choice. For the right people, yes. Not everyone could live the way you two do, constantly talking and debating and analyzing everything. But for you, it is perfect." Mrs. Crawford paused, then added, "Daniel asks about you constantly, you know. Wants to know when school will start again. You have made such a difference in his life. He is a remarkable child. Has he spoken at all?" "Not yet. But he wrote me a letter last week telling me about a book he read and what he thought of it. Full paragraphs, complex ideas. 2 years ago, I feared he might never communicate again. Now he just prefers writing to speaking, which seems perfectly reasonable to me. When the new school year began in September, Zelda faced her classroom with renewed energy. She had spent the summer developing new lesson plans, incorporating more hands-on learning and individualized instruction. The students responded enthusiastically, and even the most reluctant learners began to show progress. October brought news that made Zelda cry with joy. Jimmy Patterson had been accepted to a technical school in San Francisco with a full scholarship based on the work samples and examination results Zelda had sent. He would start the following fall, giving him time to save money and prepare. "I never would have even imagined this without you, Miss Fairmont," Jimmy said, his voice thick with emotion. "You saw something in me that I did not know was there." "I saw what was always there, Jimmy. You did the hard work of developing it. I just provided some guidance and opportunities." That evening, Zelda shared the news with Grant over dinner. They had fallen into comfortable routines, Grant handling the ranch work while Zelda taught, both contributing to household tasks, evenings spent reading or talking or simply being together. "You know what this means," Grant said thoughtfully. "Word will spread that your students can earn scholarships to prestigious schools. More families will take education seriously. You are changing the culture of this entire town." "We are changing it," Zelda corrected. "You hired Jimmy and gave him opportunities. You helped Daniel with the horses, which has been as therapeutic for him as any of my teaching. You model a different kind of manhood for these children, one where strength includes gentleness and intelligence includes humility." Grant reached across the table to take her hand. "Have I told you today that I love you?" "Yes, but I never tire of hearing it." "I love you, Zelda Lawson, your brilliant mind and your passionate heart and everything in between." As winter approached again, Zelda realized she had been in Keeler for more than a year. It felt both longer and shorter than that, longer because she could barely remember the person she had been in Boston. Shorter because she felt like she was just beginning to understand the life she was building. In November, she discovered she was pregnant. The realization brought a complex mix of emotions: joy at the prospect of a child with Grant, anxiety about balancing motherhood with teaching, curiosity about what kind of person they would create together. "Are you happy about this?" she asked Grant when she told him, suddenly uncertain. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Grant said, gathering her close. "Terrified, amazed, grateful, overwhelmed, but yes, fundamentally happy. We are going to be parents, Zelda. We are going to raise a child who knows that intelligence is valuable and that love can be both intellectual and emotional." "I want to keep teaching as long as possible," Zelda said, "and to return to it after the baby is born if we can manage it. We will figure it out together. Maybe Mrs. Crawford would be willing to watch the baby during school hours. She has been lonely since Daniel spends so much time with his studies. Or we could find another solution. The point is, you do not have to give up teaching unless you want to." They spent the winter preparing, building a cradle, setting aside baby clothes that Mrs. Crawford and other women from the town donated. Zelda taught through her pregnancy, adjusting her activities as necessary but refusing to be treated as fragile. "I am pregnant, not ill," she told well-meaning townspeople who suggested she rest more. "Women have been working through pregnancy since the beginning of human history." The baby arrived in late June, just after the school year ended. It was a boy, healthy and loud, with Grant's dark hair and what appeared to be Zelda's hazel eyes. They named him Edmund after Zelda's father, who was thrilled when they sent the telegram announcing his grandson's arrival. Motherhood was harder than Zelda had anticipated, but also more rewarding. She had worried that she might find it boring, all the repetitive tasks of feeding and changing and soothing. But Edmund was a fascinating little person from the start, already showing signs of personality and preference. "He is remarkably alert," Grant observed, watching their son track movement with intense focus. "Already trying to figure out how the world works." "Well, he comes from curious stock," Zelda said, nursing Edmund while simultaneously reading a book propped on the arm of her chair. "We will have to make sure to nurture that curiosity." Mrs. Crawford did indeed agree to watch Edmund during school hours when Zelda returned to teaching that fall. The older woman was delighted to have a baby to care for, and Edmund thrived on the attention. Daniel, now 12 and growing tall, was surprisingly gentle with the infant, often reading to him from children's books in the hours after school. Life settled into new rhythms. Zelda taught during the day, spent afternoons with Edmund, and evenings with both her son and her husband. Grant's horse breeding operation was growing steadily, his reputation for quality animals spreading through the region. They were not wealthy, but they were comfortable, with enough money for necessities and occasional luxuries like new books. Jimmy Patterson left for technical school in the fall of 1885, and Zelda felt both proud and sad watching him go. But he promised to write regularly, and he kept that promise, sending letters full of excitement about his classes and gratitude for the foundation she had provided. Other students began to show similar ambition. A girl named Sarah Mitchell, who had initially seemed interested only in finding a husband, revealed a talent for natural science and began talking about becoming a doctor. A quiet boy named Thomas showed such skill in drawing and design that Zelda helped him apply to an art institute. "You are creating a pipeline of talent out of this small town," Grant observed one evening. "These children are going to go out into the world and do extraordinary things, all because you believed they could." "They had the potential all along," Zelda insisted, though she was pleased by the recognition. "I just helped them see it and gave them tools to develop it." When Edmund turned 2, Zelda discovered she was pregnant again. This time the news felt less overwhelming, more like a natural progression. They had figured out how to balance their various responsibilities. They could do it with another child. "A sister or brother for Edmund," Grant said, his hand resting gently on Zelda's still flat stomach. "Our family is growing." The baby arrived in early spring of 1887, another boy they named Victor after Zelda's uncle, who had made her new life possible by bringing her to Keeler. Victor was different from Edmund in temperament, quieter, more contemplative, where Edmund was energetic and vocal. Two completely different personalities, Zelda marveled, watching her sons play together. Edmund, now nearly 3, was trying to teach Victor, barely able to sit up, about the wooden blocks he was building with. "Makes sense," Grant said. "You and I are different in many ways too, but we work well together. Maybe they will teach each other balance." As the years passed, Zelda found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this life. 7 years ago, she had been a rejected young woman in Boston, convinced that her intelligence made her unlovable. Now she was a wife, a mother, a teacher who had helped dozens of students reach for bigger futures, and a partner in a growing ranch business. "Do you ever regret leaving Boston?" Grant asked her one evening. They were sitting on the porch of their expanded house, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and rose. The boys were asleep inside, and the world was quiet except for the occasional sound from the horses in the nearby corral. "Never," Zelda said firmly. "I regret the pain of those rejections, but I do not regret the result. If Thomas Wellington had married me, I would be trapped in a life where I had to hide half of myself. Instead, I have you, our children, work that matters, a community that values what I offer. How could I regret that? I regret that you had to be hurt first, Grant said. That you had to feel rejected for being who you are. That still makes me angry when I think about it. Then do not think about it, Zelda suggested, leaning against his shoulder. Think instead about how extraordinarily lucky we are. How many people find a partner who truly understands them, who challenges them to be better while accepting who they are, who loves their mind as much as their heart. Not nearly enough, Grant agreed. He was quiet for a moment, then added, I have been thinking about something. All these students you are sending to universities and technical schools, they are getting opportunities that I never had. And while I have educated myself reasonably well, there are gaps in my knowledge that I am aware of. What are you saying? That maybe it is time for me to get more formal education too. Not full-time, we cannot afford that, and the ranch needs me. But there are correspondence courses, night classes in some of the larger towns. I could study animal husbandry scientifically, learn better breeding practices, maybe even business management. Zelda sat up, excited by this idea. Grant, that is wonderful. We could study together in the evenings after the boys are asleep. I could help you with any areas that overlap with my own knowledge. And imagine what you could do with the ranch if you had formal training to complement your natural abilities. They began researching options immediately. And by the fall of 1887, Grant was enrolled in a correspondence course in animal husbandry through an agricultural college. The lessons arrived by mail every month, and Grant would work through them with the same focused intensity he brought to everything he cared about. Zelda loved watching him study, seeing the same joy in learning that she felt reflected back at her. They would sit together in the evenings, Zelda grading papers or preparing lessons while Grant worked through his coursework, occasionally asking her opinion on something or sharing an interesting fact he had learned. This is perfect, Zelda said one night, looking up from her work to find Grant absorbed in a text about genetics and selective breeding. This is exactly the life I wanted without knowing how to articulate it. Intellectual companionship, meaningful work, children to love and raise, a partnership where we both keep growing. It is perfect, Grant agreed. And it all started because you were rejected for being too smart. Strange how life works sometimes, how the worst moments can lead to the best outcomes. As their sons grew, Zelda and Grant made sure to nurture both of their personalities. Edmund, energetic and social, loved helping with the horses and talking to everyone who visited the ranch. Victor, quieter and more introspective, preferred books and solitary exploration, though he too showed interest in the animals. They are already so different, Zelda marveled when Edmund was 5 and Victor was 3. Edmund learns best by doing and discussing. Victor needs time to think and observe first. Like their parents, Grant pointed out. You leap into ideas and debate them vigorously. I am more cautious, needing to think things through before I speak, but we both get to the same place eventually. In 1889, when Zelda was 30, she discovered she was pregnant for the 3rd time. This pregnancy was harder than the first 2, and she found herself needing to rest more than she wanted to. Grant took over more of the household tasks, and older students helped with the younger children at school. You do too much, Grant told her gently when she insisted on continuing her normal schedule. It is all right to ask for help or to slow down sometimes. I know, Zelda admitted. I am just not used to my body failing to keep up with my mind's ambitions. The baby arrived in early spring, and this time it was a girl. They named her Clara after Zelda's mother, and she was tiny but fierce from the moment she entered the world. She has your determination, Grant said, watching newborn Clara howl her displeasure at being cold. Listen to those lungs. She knows what she wants, and she is going to make sure everyone else knows too. Clara did indeed prove to be strong-willed, and as she grew, it became clear that she had inherited Zelda's quick mind and Grant's gentle nature in equal measure. She learned to read before she was 4, taught by her mother and older brothers, and she asked questions about everything. Why is the sky blue? Where do the stars go in the daytime? How do horses know what we want them to do? The questions were endless, and Zelda answered them all with patience and thoroughness, delighted to have a daughter who was already showing intellectual curiosity. The years continued to pass, marked by small victories and ordinary joys. Jimmy Patterson graduated from technical school and got a job with the Southern Pacific Railroad, designing bridges across difficult terrain. He credited Zelda in every letter, saying she had given him the foundation for everything that came after. Sarah Mitchell was accepted to medical school, one of the first women in California to receive such an opportunity. She too stayed in touch, writing about the challenges and triumphs of pursuing a career dominated by men. Daniel Crawford, who had never regained his voice but had learned to communicate eloquently through writing, became a naturalist, publishing detailed observations about the flora and fauna of the Owens Valley. His first published paper included a dedication to Miss Fairmont, who taught me that silence is not the same as having nothing to say. Each success felt like validation of Zelda's approach to teaching, her belief that every child deserved to have their potential nurtured regardless of their circumstances or background. She continued to teach through the years, watching generations of children pass through her schoolhouse and out into larger worlds. Grant's horse breeding operation grew into one of the most respected in the region. His combination of natural intuition and scientific knowledge produced animals that were both beautiful and functional, suited to the hard work of ranch life, but with the temperament for careful handling. "You have built something remarkable," Zelda told him one evening in 1895, when they were sitting together watching their children play in the yard. Edmund was 13 now, already helping significantly with the ranch work. Victor was 11, more interested in the record-keeping and planning aspects of the business. Clara, at 6, flitted between activities, asking questions about everything. "We have built something remarkable," Grant corrected. "None of this would exist without you, not just the children, but all of it. Your income from teaching helped us survive the early years. Your mind helped me think through business decisions. Your belief in me gave me confidence to try things I might otherwise have feared." "We are a good team," Zelda agreed, "better than I ever imagined possible." They were interrupted by Clara running up with a flower she had found. "Mama, what kind is this? I want to know its scientific name, not just what people call it." Zelda smiled and took the flower, examining it carefully. "This is Castelleja, commonly called Indian paintbrush. See the bright red bracts. They are actually modified leaves, not petals. The true flowers are much smaller, hidden inside." "Why do they do that?" Clara asked, fascinated. "The bright color attracts pollinators, birds, and insects that help the plant reproduce. It is an evolutionary adaptation." Clara absorbed this information with the seriousness of a scholar, then ran off to find more flowers to identify. Grant chuckled. "She's going to keep you busy with questions for the rest of your life." "Good," Zelda said. "I hope she never stops asking questions. That is how we learn, how we grow, how we understand the world." As the century turned toward its end, Zelda found herself taking stock of her life. She was nearly 40 now, with nearly 2 decades of teaching behind her and countless students whose lives she had influenced. Her marriage to Grant was as strong as ever. They still talked endlessly about everything, still challenged each other's thinking, still found joy in learning together. Their children were healthy and showing signs of becoming interesting, thoughtful people. Edmund wanted to expand the ranch's operations, already thinking ahead to new breeding lines and business opportunities. Victor was considering becoming a veterinarian, fascinated by animal health and welfare. Clara, still young, seemed headed towards scientific pursuits of some kind, though her interests shifted constantly as she encountered new ideas. "I have been thinking," Grant said one evening in late 1899 as they prepared for the new century, "about how far we have come. When I met you in 1883, I was just a ranch hand with a love of books and no real prospects. Now I own my own operation, have a family I adore, and have educated myself to a level I never thought possible. All because you saw something in me worth knowing." "I saw what was there," Zelda said. "I did not create it. But yes, we have both grown. I came to Keeler running away from rejection, convinced I had to choose between my mind and my heart. You taught me that was a false choice, that the right person would love all of me, and you were right." They celebrated the turn of the century with their children and the community they had become integral parts of. At the town gathering on December 31st, 1899, the mayor gave a speech acknowledging the contributions of various citizens to Keeler's growth and prosperity. "Our schoolteacher, Mrs. Lawson, has educated children who have gone on to become engineers, doctors, scientists, and business leaders," he said. "She has raised the aspirations and achievements of an entire generation. And Mr. Lawson has built a horse breeding operation that has brought recognition to our town while employing numerous local workers. Together, they represent the best of what our community can be." The recognition was gratifying, but what mattered more to Zelda was the sight of her former students in the crowd, many now adults with their own families. They had taken the foundation she provided and built their own lives, exactly as she had hoped they would. As the new century began, Zelda continued teaching, though she began to think about eventually training a successor. She was 41 years old and had been teaching for 17 years. The work was still meaningful, but she was also aware that she would not be able to do it forever. "Maybe another 5 years," she told Grant. "That would take me to 46, which seems like a reasonable time to retire from teaching. We could focus more on the ranch, on our own family, on other projects." "What kind of projects?" Grant asked, intrigued. "I have been thinking about writing down my educational methods and philosophies," Zelda admitted. "I have developed approaches over the years that seem to work well for children of different abilities and backgrounds. Maybe that knowledge could be useful to other teachers, especially in frontier communities where resources are limited." "That is a wonderful idea," Grant encouraged. "You should absolutely do it. Your father would be proud." Edmund Fairmont had visited several times over the years, watching his grandchildren grow and marveling at the life his daughter had built. His most recent visit, in the summer of 1900, had been particularly meaningful. He was aging now, in his 70s, and Zelda was aware that their time together was precious. "You made the right choice, my dear," Edmund had told her during that visit. "Coming west, marrying Grant, building this life. I worried at the time that I was sending you into exile. But you found exactly what you needed, a place where your intelligence was valued, a partner who appreciated all of you, work that allowed you to make a real difference." "I did find all of that," Zelda agreed. "And I am grateful every day for your willingness to support my decision, even when it must have seemed strange to you." "Not strange," Edmund corrected. "Hopeful. I knew Boston had nothing left to offer you but more rejection and limitation. I had to believe that somewhere there was a better option." In 1903, Zelda's life took an unexpected turn when she discovered she was pregnant again at 43. It was a shock. Clara was already 14, and Zelda had assumed her childbearing years were behind her. "Are you all right with this?" Grant asked, concerned by her silence when she told him. "I am. Processing," Zelda admitted. "It was not planned, obviously, but also it does not feel wrong, just unexpected." The pregnancy was difficult, as pregnancies at her age often were, and she had to reduce her teaching schedule significantly. One of her former students, now a capable young woman of 22, took over most of the day-to-day instruction while Zelda provided guidance and planning. The baby arrived in early spring of 1904, another boy they named Henry after Grant's father. He was healthy despite Zelda's age, and the older children doted on him immediately. "A surprise brother," Clara said, holding tiny Henry with practiced ease. "I like it. I was starting to feel outnumbered." Edmund, now 20, smiled at his youngest sibling with genuine affection. "At least he will never lack for people to teach him things. Between mother's lessons and the rest of us helping, he will probably read before he can walk." That prediction proved surprisingly accurate. Henry was indeed quick to learn, surrounded as he was by a family that valued education and discussion. Even as a toddler, he would sit quietly during dinner conversations, absorbing the talk of books and ideas and current events that flowed constantly in the Lawson household. Zelda did retire from full-time teaching after Henry was born, though she continued to tutor students who needed extra help and to advise her successor. She used the additional time to work on her educational philosophy manuscript, drawing on 2 decades of experience to create a comprehensive guide for teachers in frontier communities. "Listen to this," she would say to Grant, reading passages aloud for his feedback. "Does this make sense? Am I being too theoretical or too practical?" Grant, who had completed his correspondence coursework and was now taking occasional trips to agricultural colleges for additional training, was the perfect sounding board. "Maybe add an example here," he would suggest. "Show how the theory works in practice." Their partnership had only deepened over the years. They were now in their mid-40s, still intellectually curious, still devoted to each other, still finding new things to discuss and explore together. Their children were growing into interesting adults who shared their parents' love of learning, and the ranch was thriving under Grant's expert management. In 1908, Edmund Fairmont passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78. Zelda traveled to Boston for the funeral, bringing Grant and their younger children. It was her first time back east in 25 years, and she was struck by how foreign it all felt. "I barely recognize this place," she told Grant as they walked through Boston Common. "Or maybe I barely recognize the person I was when I lived here. Either way, this does not feel like home anymore." "Where does feel like home?" Grant asked, though he knew the answer. "Keeler. Our house, our ranch, our community. That is home now. That is where I belong." They returned to California with relief, glad to be back in the vast openness of the West after the cramped formality of Boston. Zelda threw herself into completing her manuscript, wanting to honor her father's memory by finishing the intellectual project he had encouraged. The book, titled Teaching on the Frontier, Methods for Maximizing Student Potential in Limited Resource Communities, was published in 1910 by a small educational press. It did not become a bestseller, but it found its audience teachers in rural schools across the West who were grateful for practical advice grounded in real experience. "You are an author now," Grant teased, reading reviews that praised Zelda's insights and methods. "Should I call you Professor Fairmont Lawson?" "Just Zelda is fine," she replied, but she was pleased by the recognition. The book represented the distillation of everything she had learned about teaching, and knowing it might help other educators felt like a fitting legacy. As their children entered adulthood, Zelda and Grant watched with pride as each found their own path. Edmund took over increasing responsibility for the ranch, eventually becoming Grant's full partner in the business. He married a local woman, the daughter of a mining engineer, who shared his practical intelligence and work ethic. Victor did become a veterinarian, studying at a college in San Francisco, and then returning to Keeler to serve the agricultural community. He brought scientific knowledge back to the region, improving animal health and welfare in ways that benefited everyone. Clara, as predicted, pursued scientific education, specializing in botany. She became one of the leading experts on desert plant life, publishing papers that advanced understanding of how vegetation adapted to harsh environments. She never married, devoted entirely to her work, and Zelda supported that choice completely. "Not everyone needs to marry," she told Grant when people commented on Clara's single status. "She has meaningful work, intellectual challenges, a life she finds fulfilling. That is all anyone needs." Henry, the surprise youngest child, showed talents in mathematics that exceeded even his mother's abilities. By the time he was 15, he was working through university-level problems. Zelda helped him apply to prestigious schools, determined that he would have every opportunity to develop his gifts. In 1916, Zelda turned 57, and Grant was 59. They had been married for 32 years, and their life together had exceeded anything Zelda had dared to imagine when she first arrived in Keeler as a rejected young woman running away from Boston's limitations. "You remember the first time we talked about books?" Zelda asked one evening. They were sitting in their comfortable parlor, both reading as they did most nights, occasionally sharing interesting passages or thoughts. "Of course," Grant said, setting down his book. "I came to ask about Daniel Crawford, and you offered to lend me books." I could barely believe it, this educated Boston lady willing to share her library with a ranch hand. "I saw something in you that first day," Zelda recalled. "An intelligence that had nothing to do with formal schooling, a hunger for ideas and conversation." I recognized it because I felt the same hunger. "We were both lonely in our own ways," Grant agreed. "Me with no one to talk to about the things I read and thought about. You rejected for the very qualities that made you extraordinary." Strange that it took coming to a small mining town in California for both of us to find what we needed. "Not strange," Zelda corrected. "Perfect. This place valued what we had to offer. The people here judged us by our character and capabilities, not by arbitrary social rules. We could never have built this life in Boston." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the kind of silence that comes from decades of companionship, where words are unnecessary because understanding runs deeper than language. "I want you to know," Zelda said eventually, "that these years with you have been the happiest of my life. Not just happy, fulfilling, meaningful, exactly right. You loved my mind as much as my heart, and that made all the difference. It let me be fully myself, which is the greatest gift anyone has ever given me." Grant crossed the room to sit beside her, taking her hand with the same tenderness he had shown 33 years earlier when he first courted her. "The gift was mutual," he said. "You saw me as I actually was, not as society wanted to categorize me. You challenged me to keep learning and growing, but you also accepted me exactly as I was. That is love, Zelda, the real kind, the kind that makes both people better while letting them remain themselves." As the evening deepened, they talked about their children and grandchildren. Edmund and his wife now had 3 children of their own, and Victor had recently married a fellow scientist. They discussed the ranch's continuing success and the letters still arriving from former students, now scattered across the country, but still remembering the teacher who had believed in their potential. "We have built something good," Zelda said. "Not just a family or a business, but a legacy." Students who went on to do important work, children and grandchildren who value learning and kindness, a community that is better for our presence in it. "That is all anyone can hope for," Grant agreed. "To leave the world a little better than we found it, to love and be loved, to use our minds and hearts fully. We have done all of that." They continued to live full lives as they aged, still reading voraciously, still discussing everything from politics to philosophy to the latest scientific discoveries. Henry left for university in 1919, studying mathematics at Berkeley, and his letters home were full of excitement about the theories he was learning and developing. Clara's work in botany gained increasing recognition, and she was invited to present at conferences across the country. She would visit Keeler between expeditions, filling the house with stories of her research and the fascinating people she had met. Edmund and Victor both lived nearby, running their respective businesses while raising their own families. The grandchildren would visit regularly, and Zelda found joy in teaching this new generation, answering their endless questions with the same patience she had shown their parents and her students. In 1923, Zelda and Grant celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary with their entire family gathered around them. Edmund, now 40, gave a toast that made Zelda cry. "To my parents," he said, raising his glass, "who showed us that love means accepting and celebrating all of who a person is. Who proved that intelligence and devotion are not opposing forces, but complementary ones. Who built a life based on mutual respect, shared curiosity, and genuine partnership. Everything good in my life traces back to the example they set." The other children echoed the sentiment, and the grandchildren, ranging from teenagers to toddlers, added their own less eloquent but equally heartfelt expressions of love. "We are very lucky," Zelda whispered to Grant later that night after everyone had left and they were alone in the house that held so many memories. "We are very blessed," Grant corrected. "Luck is random. This is the result of choices we made to be honest with each other, to value what mattered, to build something real rather than something that just looked good from the outside." They continued for several more years in good health and good spirits, watching their family expand and their legacy grow. Zelda's book on teaching was still being used in frontier schools, and Grant's horse breeding methods had been adopted by ranchers across the West. When Grant passed away peacefully in 1928 at the age of 71, Zelda grieved deeply but without regret. They had had 45 years of marriage marked by love, respect, and genuine partnership. He had been her intellectual equal and her emotional anchor, and she missed him terribly. But she also knew that their love story was complete, not ended. It lived on in their children and grandchildren, in the students she had taught, in the horses that bore the distinctive traits of Grant's careful breeding, in the community they had helped build. Zelda lived for another 8 years, surrounded by family and staying intellectually active until the end. She continued to read, to discuss ideas with whoever would engage with her, to encourage her grandchildren's curiosity and ambitions. When she passed away in 1936, at the age of 77, her funeral was attended by hundreds of people, former students, their children, colleagues, neighbors, and the extended Lawson family. Speaker after speaker rose to talk about how Zelda had changed their lives, how she had believed in their potential when no one else did, how she had shown them that intelligence was something to celebrate rather than hide. Clara gave the final eulogy, her scientific precision giving way to pure emotion. My mother was rejected by Boston society for being too smart, for refusing to pretend she was less than she was. She could have let that make her bitter or small. Instead, she came west and found a man who loved her mind as much as her heart, and together they built a life that honored both. She taught hundreds of children that their intelligence was valuable, that their dreams were possible, that being smart was never something to apologize for. And she did all of this while being a devoted wife, mother, and grandmother. If I can live half as authentically and half as meaningfully as she did, I will consider my life well spent. Zelda was buried beside Grant in the Keeler Cemetery, their headstones marking the final resting place of two extraordinary people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. Their love story became the stuff of local legend, the educated Boston lady and the self-taught cowboy, who had proven that true partnership transcends social class and formal credentials. Parents told their children about Grant and Zelda Lawson, using them as examples of what real love looked like: mutual respect, intellectual engagement, emotional support, and the courage to be fully yourself with another person. The house they had built together stayed in the family for generations, always occupied by descendants who inherited their love of learning and their commitment to living authentically. The ranch continued to thrive, producing quality horses that carried Grant's legacy forward. And the schoolhouse where Zelda had taught for so many years eventually became a museum dedicated to frontier education, with special exhibits honoring her methods and her impact. In the end, what had seemed like rejection and failure in Boston had been the doorway to everything Zelda truly wanted: meaningful work, genuine love, a life where she never had to hide or diminish any part of herself. She had been rejected for being too smart, but she had found a cowboy who loved her mind as much as her heart, and together they had built a legacy that proved intelligence and love were never incompatible, only waiting for the right people to show how perfectly they could combine.